Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 7, Episode 1 of Pro Wrestling's Top 50. I'm your host, Travis McNeil, and today we start our brand new countdown, counting down the top 50 matches in CHIKARA Pro history, with match number 50 on our list, which is the Young Lions Cup Tournament first round match between Adam Cole and Kyle O'Reilly from the Young Lions Cup 8 Night 2 event held on August the 28th of 2010. This match is a little bit of a strange pick for me. With these countdowns, I always find that match number 50 is probably the hardest match for me to pick of all. I narrowed down for CHIKARA. It was about 70-ish matches that I thought had the potential of making the top 50 list after I finished my big rewatch. And then because I am completely obsessive, I went back and watched all of those matches and, ranked my top 50 and, cut off my bottom 20-ish. And it's really difficult to determine, what is going to be that, make or break match that, I have to determine, is it better than that match to make the list, or, is it worth to fall off the list? And I ended up going with this match because in one way, it really doesn't feel like a CHIKARA match. So that was my, bit of struggle here with this one being included on the list. But at the same time, it also really feels like a CHIKARA match. So I'll kind of break down the reasons for that momentarily. But when this match happened, this was kind of like a big time rematch. And, if you weren't kind of involved in this scene at this point, Adam Cole, he had been coming up, through the CZW ranks at the time of this match. He was the CZW World Junior Heavyweight Champion. CZW wasn't, quite in its peak years, but it was really recovering nicely, in that 2010, 2011 period where it was kind of starting to get a little bit of a buzz again. And a lot of that had to do with some of the younger talent coming through it, specifically Adam Cole. Kyle O'Reilly was from the Pacific Northwest area, would work ECWA, in Vancouver, British Columbia, and was kind of, dabbling, in that whole kind of, BC, California, Washington sort of scene that, is really starting to boom nowadays. We have promotions like Defy and you have good talent coming out of that area like Daniel McCabe and, all of these other people, Nick Wayne being another one. But, at this time in the early 2010s, there, really wasn't a lot of buzz surrounding that. So Kyle was kind of the first guy since Davey Richards, a good, 5-6 years before him. And coincidentally, Davey Richards, the trainer of Kyle O'Reilly, Kyle being his protege, that really started to make that name for himself. So these two would find themselves wrestling on the pre-show of a Dragon Gate USA show at the end of 2009. And they would, go into that match. Cole, had that, CZW kind of familiarity with the ECW arena, but O'Reilly came into that match as a relative unknown. And they proceeded to steal the show on the pre-show with only having a 4-minute match where they, really went balls to the walls and showed all of their unique offense and really made a great impression for that crowd. So this was the long-awaited rematch for that, and thankfully they would get a lot more than 4 minutes here. And both of these performers, even though this match was only 8 months later, had really shown their growth here. And it's so funny to watch now because both of them look so young. Cole especially just looks, like, they were their early 20s in this match. So, they look their age, but, watching in both of these guys now, you really see it. And it's funny to me too, because in a way, I don't want to say, some of their stuff kind of seems like amateur hour, but it does in a way, but it also, shows kind of the potential that these guys had, in their youth when they were at this point of their careers. Because, Adam Cole really does a lot of like generic, standard heel stuff in the early goings of this match. He does he pulled my hair referee, when Kyle O'Reilly didn't pull his hair, and, a lot of mocking and being very hammy and taunting the crowd and everything like this, that, if you were to go to your local, pro wrestling match, with guys that you've never heard of, you're going to see a lot of that. It's kind of your basic, like, wrestling school when you're very limited with what you can do. You want to work and you want to cultivate on audience interaction. But the funny part is, because for as basic and like I said, like almost like amateurish as that stuff seems, in 2010, this was kind of weirdly unique, because, the wrestling, especially like the Northeast indie scene, was so much about, doing cool moves and, standing out in that way. And you had, ricochets of the world doing double moonsaults and everything like this, that Adam Cole's kind of more like slowed down, labored, character-based, like, I'm gonna be a heel sort of stuff, it kind of stood out. And that's what I think, more than anything, really made people start to notice him and be like, this guy's kind of good. Like, he's going to get a deal someday with a little bit more seasoning and experience. And ultimately, look where he is now, right? So that is exactly, what happened. It started him on his, very decorated career path that he would end up having. This match is just, it's really good. And it's kind of like your typical super indie match around the time where, there's some good wrestling at the start that doesn't really go anywhere, and it develops into these big sequences and big moves, and the crowd, loses their mind for it. But it really works, and it's especially fascinating now, seeing how these guys would be linked to each other throughout their careers, becoming the Future Shock tag team and eventually blowing up and having their hybrid fighting rules match in ROH that, Cole would lose his teeth, that, really made them stand out, and their feuds in Ring of Honor and Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, and, becoming the Undisputed Era in the WWE, and eventually that blowing up, and then, transporting over to AEW. These two guys are synonymous with each other, and it's really because of the fantastic chemistry they had early on as opponents in that aforementioned Dragon Gate USA match, and in this match as well. So this, in my opinion, is probably the best first round match of any Young Lions Cup tournament there ever was. The Young Lions Cup, if you're unfamiliar, it sort of started as CHIKARA's like original title. It was a tournament for wrestlers that at the time had wrestled in, I believe, less than 50 matches, which, was all of the CHIKARA students at that point. It eventually morphed into being for wrestlers that were under 25 years old. And the tournament over the years would see different, formats, it being, a singles, regular single elimination tournament, to having, 4 ways in the first round leading to a one-on-one finals. But, to me, in the golden years of CHIKARA, that 2015 to, 2012-ish, time period, this was the format of the Young Lions Cup, and it's the one that I always romanticize with, where it was 6 singles matches with the 6 winners competing in a 6-way elimination at the end of the night. That happening in 2 consecutive nights, and then the 2 winners of the 2 6-ways meeting off on night 3 of the Young Lions Cup to determine the Young Lions Cup champion. Rather than a title belt, it was an actual cup, like a trophy, and it would be defended all throughout the year before being vacated for the following year's tournament. Very similar to what the International Wrestling Cartel out of Pittsburgh would do with their Super Indie tournament. So kind of follows that format. Lots of memorable moments in Young Lions Cup history that we will talk, several times about throughout this season. But this, to me, like I said, was probably the best, opening round match where both of these guys got a lot of time just to show their stuff. And the story here, early on is really good, where Adam Cole, has this chip on his shoulder, and he's arrogant, and he wants to wrestle at his pace, and, he's able to control while he's doing that. But Kyle O'Reilly would get, all of these brief flashes of like this explosive, high octane offense. But when he would start to chain too much together, he would ultimately make a mistake. He would come off the top rope and get hit with a drop kick, or, he would charge into, a super kick, and all of these things where, he wouldn't slow down, and it allowed Cole to maintain the pace. This match, though, it really builds and it really escalates, like I said, into that big, indie match of the time where the crowd, really explodes and gets into it. We get this match rules chants and things like that, which, watching now are very endearing to me. But, we get a big strike exchange that O'Reilly ends with a big lariat. And that's where this match, really starts to kick into the next gear. Cole, in the early goings on, he would mock O'Reilly, and, at one point he hits like a dragon kick to his back and then pretends he's going to do all of this, Brazilian jiu-jitsu stuff, and then like grabs a chin lock, like I said, that hammy kind of heel 101 stuff. But that gets paid off later in the match where O'Reilly just goes to town on him with a bunch of dragon kicks. So we do get, these things that play off of each other. Cole, O'Reilly has a game plan of sticking to Cole's leg. He was using the ankle lock as one of his pet moves at that time. So he goes back to that well repeatedly, and Cole does a pretty good job selling it throughout. Of course, kind of near the late, stages of the match, the selling on it gets a little bit iffy, but not enough to really bother me too much. He's constantly going back to the lariat, back to the ankle. There's a point where Cole kind of counters out of a move and hits the big like Yoshigaroshi, but over the bad knee, and he sells that and can't capitalize. We get some great near falls here. Cole hits a big wheelbarrow German suplex, which was one of his pet moves at that time. O'Reilly chains a tornado DDT into a brain buster, which was one of his pet moves. So we get a lot of stuff to, make the crowd happy. And it leads to this big moment where they're both fighting on the ring apron. Of course they are. It's a 2010 indie match. And Cole hits, what was his finishing move at the time? The collateral, which is basically like a Northern Lights bomb. He hits it on the ring apron to Kyle. Kyle barely beats the count in at 19. So this was a big spot. It leads to them both, trading forearms on the mat and coming up and yelling at each other and having this big strike exchange that, ends with Cole ducking a PK and hitting like a kneeling super kick for a great near fall. So it's just really good fan service action that really works for the crowd. And the finish here too is kind of out of nowhere, which would maybe sometimes bother me, especially when watching these matches in a vacuum now. But I watch this match now and I view it a lot differently than I would have at the time, just knowing where these guys went with their career and almost looking at it as, this kind of fun peek into, what they used to be before they became these major players. And the finish is O'Reilly, going back to the well with the ankle lock. At this point, Cole finally having it scouted, being able to kick O'Reilly off and then catching him by surprise with an inside cradle for the 3 count. But what I really love about it is Cole is so great where he immediately bails from the ring, knowing that he pulled that one off by the skin of his teeth, and that if that match went even a couple moments later, O'Reilly was going to kick his teeth out, which eventually he would do many years later. But, then when he gets enough distance and he's safely behind rows of fans, Cole is, very much trash talking and jaw jacking to O'Reilly. And I really liked, even in the early goings of his career, seeing that heel persona and that gift of gab that, would end up getting him, such a prominent position in NXT and now with AEW. So this match here, like I said, it almost feels like your indie match of the day transplanted into CHIKARA, but it's a part of the Young Lions Cup. And why it feels like a CHIKARA match to me is if you didn't follow CHIKARA at the time and you go back and find some sort of a list that shows all of the wrestlers that worked their way through CHIKARA, you will get an absolute who's who. It is completely staggering to look at now, even though, we lived through it at the time. And you get all of these legends and these international wrestlers and all of, some of the biggest stars in wrestling history that were in CHIKARA, but you also get a lot of wrestlers like Adam Cole and Kyle O'Reilly that are now some of the biggest stars in wrestling, but, got their shot in CHIKARA, when they were very young into their careers, a lot of them through the Young Lions Cup. So in that way, that is to me CHIKARA in a nutshell, giving exposure and opportunity to talent from all over, the United States and eventually all over the world. and, helping show that spotlight on them and, eventually getting them to where they would become. This match is a lot of fun. Like I said, it's a great little blast for the past. If you're a fan of these two, you can watch it on Independent Wrestling TV as stated with all CHIKARA content. You can subscribe to my channel here on YouTube so that you never miss a video. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Wrestling50. And please join me again next time as we continue to count down Pro Wrestling's Top 50.